navigate through uncertainty and chartered territory towards change when the path is unclear and seems to be far from straightforward? That is what we're talking about today. Welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the most nuanced and challenging soft skills needed to drive significant systemic change to make a real impact through your leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu, and today our special guest is Lisa DeAngelis. She is a holistic change practitioner and the author of Embracing the Unknown, and she'll walk us through how to understand the barriers, develop a compass, and implement directions and guideposts that can help a leader map change pathways for navigating complexity and unknowns, which is a really great topic for season 4's focus on navigating leadership complexity. So be ready to take notes. I always do. Reflect deeply and identify at least one small step to further develop your hard skills muscle, which I think Lisa will really help you do. So great to have you on the show, Lisa.
I am so happy to be here, and thank you for that introduction. Exploring this aspect of change is something I'm incredibly passionate about, so I'm excited to dive into this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Lisa and I met, like many people, I guess, are meeting these days on the internet. We just liked each other's stuff, and we were having like actual meaningful conversations online. And one of those, some of those conversations were specifically about navigating complexity, right? Leadership complexity. But I didn't know this about her until I started reading a little bit more about her background. Lisa, you started out as a music major, in singing and the arts. So I'm going to start out with just a little fun icebreaker, learning a little bit about you. What is your favorite art piece or song, and why?
I love that question. Yes, I was a classically trained singer, which most people don't know about me when they first meet me at this point in my life, at this moment in time. But singing was something that grabbed me from a really young age. I started singing with a children's choir when I was 9 years old, and I had an early, strong passion for classical music. So my favorite song, art piece song, will have to combine them because it's actually Mahler's Third Symphony, which is a really funny response to that question, because most people would say sort of, I have a favorite song or I have a favorite art piece. But listening to, when I was actually performing in a performance of Mahler's Third Symphony with that children's choir, it really was the first time I learned to listen with all my senses. And it was a full sensory musical experience that has really stuck with me. And to this day, it's one of my favorite things to do is pop on that symphony and let things ride, because I feel like there's so much input that comes in such a meaningful way when we learn to expand our sense of connection with the world through something like music. And I love that about the experience.
Yeah, out of curiosity, I guess what I'm wondering is, do you see any connections between being able to suck in everything through all your senses, in the application of leaders navigating complexity today? Does that have anything to do with even like the term holistic change practitioner or holistic change?
Yeah, that's a great segue. Well, musicians themselves have a really interesting set of skills that gets developed, I'll say, in sort of an indirect fashion, because no one's sitting around with a musician saying, okay, this is how you collaborate, this is how you communicate without speaking, this is how you assimilate to your environment. But these are all skills that musicians have to learn to work in this field. One has to be able to communicate without direct contact through words like we're used to doing. You learn through eye contact. You learn to actually listen to the way someone's breathing in order to understand how you might work to fit in. And it's really never a situation where I'm first, you're second, you're following me. It's really this dance, this game of what it feels like to listen, to follow, to lead, to pick up, passing that baton. So these are all incredible leadership skills. Some people don't know this about musicians if you've never been in this situation, but part of what a musician is skilled at doing is going into any situation and very quickly gauging and assimilating to the environment. So I might have training in one specific area of how I perform a song, but if I move into a space where it's not going to work like I thought, I have to very quickly make some decisions through input from my environment to say, okay, what shifts am I going to make to actually fit, fill, and meet this space in the most meaningful way? And yes, that's actually what I view holistic change as really doing, because it actually goes from just how do I solve this problem to something much, much deeper than that. It's not just what changes, it's how the change happens. Why is it needed? What's important to allow this change to actually integrate in a sustainable way? Often it's going to set a new baseline for the way I'm showing up, for the way that the people around me are then understanding what's happening. And that's a really big idea of what we're talking about when we talk about holistic change versus just solving a problem or fixing an issue. We're really looking at it in a way where we're turning it upside down and inside out and really digging in to look at the kind of the exciting inner pieces and still try to figure out what our next steps are.
I love so much about this analogy. It is describing the difference between surface level band-aid fixes that probably still create a cacophony of noise that you're not addressing versus the harmony and melody all working together. And you have to think much more deeply and much more integrated and tracking how the sort of different parts of the system are moving. I'm wondering about then, the way that you describe this sounds like part of the work of leadership within change is adapting, fitting, filling, right, meeting the space. There's a bit more of a followership, right? And at the same time, a lot of earlier career leaders are receiving the message or feeling like, I want to be valued for who I am as an individual, right?
Mm.
And they're receiving messages around authentic leadership and being who you are and not just adapting or trying to fit in or assimilate or whatever, right? Which is a very different sort of context, and there's a reason for that, right? There's the reason behind that is more about feeling valued, right? And feeling like people appreciate, value, see you for your contribution, not so that you're not sort of compromising who you are. How do you sort of balance those two ideas? And feel free to keep going with this analogy because I just love it so much, and I think people can really like latch on to understanding this, in a relatable way.
Absolutely. So first of all, this for me is where the concept of what's your compass comes in, and this idea of like what helps you reorient to a core system of alignment, a core system of value. And it goes back to what you're saying. How do we consistently show up as who we are, not completely abandoning that in an effort to assimilate? That I think is actually the interesting trick. And yes, to expand the music analogy a little bit, if I ignore it and I just show up and do exactly what I did in a different situation and don't make any adjustments, I'm going to have a little bit of a difficult time meeting and matching and really kind of working in harmony with my environment there. If I swing too far in the other direction and I completely abandon everything about my own sense of what I'm performing, how I'm performing it, what the delivery is, the opposite happens is that something gets lost in that translation. And I perhaps have swung too far. It's interesting when you look at actually, I can get a little bit nerdy running down these rabbit holes, but at the history of a compass of what it is, it's actually a fascinating kind of, I don't know, almost like a testament to ingenuity and curiosity, because really what it was a stone. And the stone had these magnetic capabilities that they realized sort of could kind of drive them into alignment with the Earth's magnetic field. And so if we think about the development of this sense of how do we actually realign ourselves with the core structures so that we have the ability to explore, that is so cool to me, because we're not asking ourselves to abandon anything, and we're definitely not asking ourselves to move so far that we've lost who we are in the process. That, I think, is the really fascinating space that is really fun to dive into and explore. And you brought up the concept of adaptability. Adaptability is not something that we, again, have to completely change our baselines to achieve. It's the ability to see, shift, and assimilate. That's really the kind of the special sauce, if you will, of how adaptability shows up. And for me, resilience is another kind of partner piece to that, is what does it mean to be resilient? And it doesn't just mean to revert back. It means to be elastic. And that's if you look up some of the lexicons and the definitions of resilience, elasticity is a big piece of that. So how do we stretch ourselves? And resilience really means that ability to stretch in the face of some of these challenges or shifts or experiences where we don't quite know where we're going.
I am totally resonating with all of that. So now, going back to, because I think this concept of holistic change is new to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So how do you define it then, with all of that context in mind that you've just set up for us? How do you define it?
Mm-hmm. That's really, really great. I view it as approaching change by seeing the system as a whole, recognizing that it's a complex structure and that change will happen in cycles rather than the binary A to B. Simply put, it's a little bit more like, rather than focusing on just pruning the branches, we're feeding and nurturing the roots. That's really what it is. And sometimes we've got to dig a little bit to see how far the roots go so we can really understand what we're working with. And that really helps us really, again, get a concept of what we're working with in the whole structure situation. Because again, it is very easy to just say, if I do a little bit of tweaking here and there, this is going to bloom really nicely. But we're not really having an eye out for what it means to make sure all aspects of the structure are moving forward in a way that's healthy and sustainable for growth and emergence long term.
You are so good with analogies.
Thank you.
Well, when we're reaching an ad break, when we come back, let's start with kind of how you got to this point of being interested in this, because I think there's some personal formative moments, and then there's experiences with leaders that you've had. And I'm curious, how you got to this point yourself. We're nearing an ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest today, Lisa DeAngelis. The Hard Skills airs on Tuesdays at 5 Eastern. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Branco, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest today, Lisa DeAngelis, a holistic change practitioner. We just got done talking about a great analogy on what holistic change means to Lisa, and then the application of adaptability and resilience. And we started sort of applying that to her definition. Now, Lisa, because I was exploring your website, and everyone should do that, I'll share that website later on. What I learned about you is that your interest started with a formative childhood experience with a jaw problem where a surgeon said that you will need reconstructive jaw surgery. And you wanted to find an alternative solution that not only addressed your jaw problem, but in a way that was, maybe not so invasive. What ended up happening is the solution that you found not only addressed your jaw problem, but like to the point of becoming a singer, a teacher, a speaker, strong things that require the strong, consistent jaw usage. So you went from like one end to the other because of this alternative outcome. And that was like a massive personal change and transformation. I'm curious about how do you apply your own perspective of holistic change, adaptability, resilience to what you went through, what you see others go through?
Yes. So yes. And it's funny because at 18, when I was having some jaw problems, I do actually have a disc issue on one side of my jaw. There is an actual very physiological thing that goes on with my body system. This isn't just psychosomatic. It wasn't just a little bit of stress induced or anything like that. It was really jarring. I felt threatened at a core level to say, oh my gosh, what happens if this affects my life in a way that doesn't enable me to move forward in the way I wanted to at the time. Looking back, it's really fascinating because this experience really was the foundation for understanding at a truly somatic level what holistic change is. Because yes, the surface story is I went to this surgeon who's a specialist and said, you need reconstructive jaw surgery. And I said, whoa, no way. That's not something I'm interested in doing. But what happened was I found a holistic change practitioner who is a certified teacher of the Alexander technique, which I am also a certified teacher of. And the principles of that technique are really foundational in holistic somatic change, how to look at what your body does at a very somatic level to alter, affect, and enhance performance in whatever area you apply it, from performance to work to just overall wellness. But fascinatingly, when I went to start working with her, I went in very typically of just the way our culture works and said, I have a jaw problem. And much to my dismay, she didn't work at all on my jaw. She was talking to me about how I was standing, where my balance was, how I kept thinking, geez, don't you listen to me? The jaw is the problem. But it turns out the jaw was absolutely not the problem. It was just the loudest symptom. And that was something that really shifted for me once I recognized that what speaks to us the loudest is not always the thing that needs addressing, even though it doesn't make people feel comfortable all of the time if you don't directly address that. So this is a little bit of the delicate balance that we're working with when we're working with navigating change. and the complexities of that process, because it would be very easy for me to say, you're not listening to me. This is not what I think needs to happen. But in reality, I didn't know what I didn't know. And what I didn't know was that my whole system was not working together in a way that really communicated how I could then, as a whole body, as a whole person, show up in the most meaningful way. And I've seen that in other leadership and, workplace situations. I was once working with a woman who she was doing an incredible job making these shifts in the workplace. And one of them was increasing, I guess, what we would call, improvements in employee experience, right? They installed a cool coffee bar and they changed their policy on taking personal days and sick day. And it was, kind of a no questions asked. You use your time as you wish. We encourage people to have a flex schedule set up in a way that works best for them. But they were confused. She was confused. There wasn't actually much change in her employees once they rolled out some of these benefits, shall we call them, or enhancements in the workplace environment. And what ended up happening as we worked through the process of trying to figure this out was that it didn't address some of the core cultural challenges in that workplace. People didn't feel like they had the permission to step away and use that cool coffee bar. They were unsure of whether they were really, truly not going to get pushback for taking a personal day without being sick, or an extra day on top of their vacation just because, right? So we realized that there was still a missing piece there. And on the surface, she had, quote, solved the problem. But it revealed a different layer of the workplace situation that was really important to also look at. But that required her and the situation to step back a little bit and say, okay, rather than being so focused on, you asked for this and I gave it to you, why isn't the result happening? Is to kind of look at that from a, we use these terms all the time, but a 10,000 foot view or a 30,000 foot view. I'm a fan. I worked with a mentor once who would talk about a balcony view, right? Like what just happens if you just go up to the balcony and look down a little bit? You don't have to go all the way up to 10,000 or 30,000 feet to get that kind of a view, but really just removing yourself enough so that your perspective shifts and you can say, okay, what's really happening here? And how do we really look at the core of what we're challenged with in any given situation? So my personal jaw problem was sort of an entree into this world of what it actually means to change in a way that's bigger, that's more holistic. And certainly that's more sustainable because, as you pointed out, I use my jaw all the time. And if I'm not careful, I can still fall back into my old patterns. But it is up to me to really look at what are all of the things I can put into place so that even if I have a setback, I'm able to get myself back to a space where I can rebound and I can really utilize the strengths that I know are in place when my whole system is working as it should.
Yeah, absolutely. I
think are you muted maybe? I can't hear you for a moment.
Testing.
I wonder what happened there. Okay, let's try that again.
Testing.
That was on my side. I'm sorry,
Okay.
my computer's flipped up something. Oh no, one of those technology freakouts in the middle of recording.
Yeah, what I was saying is that you often see this with the body where something is going wrong with let's say a hip flexor problem. I'm going to use my hip flexor problem, right? I have hip flexor problems. And you could target it directly, but that hip flexor is connected to so many other parts of your body that if anything else is thrown off, it will cause the hip flexor to overcompensate, right? And then, as you said, it's going to be the loudest where it's overcompensating and working the hardest, even though what you should be targeting is where it started in the first place. And the body system is the same as the work system in that way. right? Lisa, you're going to be like in my head, the queen of analogies now. That I can't tell you how many requests I get for me to come in and quote unquote fix a civility and respect problems among employees. Then we get into it and I ask questions about like, tell me about the leadership team. Oh, 2 are vacant. 1 person is acting temporarily. There's been constant change over in the leadership team. You know, this one, they've reported him several times. You know, but you want me to talk to the employees about civility and respect, you know, and it's just again, it's a Band-Aid problem. And, you know, part of the goal of whether it's, you know, a physical therapist, an acupuncturist, a doctor, an organizational development psychologist, a change practitioner, is to find a way to say, we can fix this, but that won't fix the bigger problem. Or we can spend more time with where it seems to be coming from and start there. Yes, it takes more effort, but the long-term sustainability is what we're after, right? So now, yeah, right? So now looking at it from an adaptability and a resiliency perspective, can you actually improve resiliency in a system?
So I love this question. And I found some fascinating research when I was writing my book. And it was actually a research study on resilience in ant colonies after disruption. And as soon as I saw that, I went, oh, cool. What do ants have to say about resilience? And what I found really interesting is that there were 3 distinct things that they brought out of this, 3 distinct responses. And it was either resistance, redirection, or reconstruction. So some of them really focused on building a strong infrastructure so they were resistant to any disturbance to their colony system. Some were redirecting energy and resources immediately to prevent disturbance from becoming fatal. And others would focus on rebuilding in the aftermath when neither of the other 2 were possible, sometimes ending up stronger than they started. And I think there's so much brilliance to learn from what can we look at from nature and how we respond to something like resilience. What does that mean when we apply it to our own lives and our own situations?
Super interesting. That's exactly what I want to dig into a little bit more when we come back from the break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Lisa DeAngelis. The Hard Skills airs on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Broncu, and our guest, Lisa DeAngelis, a holistic change practitioner. And so she just shared this really interesting research on how ants become more resilient or sort of face the hard decisions around navigating complex situations and where they choose to direct their energy. And she saw them as choosing to either be resistant to it in certain situations and putting their energy in sort of being resistant to change, right? Putting their energy towards redirection and putting their energy towards reconstruction after something has happened, which I really like that analogy and applying it to how we see people doing that in the workspace around navigating challenges and change, right? So I'm curious, how do you see this being applied to change management?
Yeah, and it's funny just because I even love the further piece of this specific study, because we think of ants as really hard workers. They can carry, I don't know what the statistic is, something like 100 times their body weight or something like that. Maybe it's not that high, but they can carry significantly more than their body weight. They really don't stop working. They're just sort of this constant thing. And I think that's one of the interesting things we can also take away from a study like this, is that the idea that we keep working, that we don't give up, that we look at kind of what's in our roster, so to speak, of resources and tools we can use is really important. So for me, a couple really practical applications would be an example of resistance. And, it's the only thing I don't love about this is the word resistant, because it's not resistant to changing. It's resistant to the disruption of change. And I think that's a really important thing to say. Resistance to change is it could be a whole nother topic of conversation that I don't want to go too far into today, but resistant to a disruption due to change means that we're really setting up solid infrastructure to strengthen ahead of time. We're using those visionary tools and skills to say, what might support me when I go through this? So something I'll often work with people on is the idea that how do you prepare for a difficult conversation? You rehearse, you sit down and you think through all of the layers of, okay, what might come up here? What might this person ask me? What might I need to address in this complex situation or in this difficult conversation that I could prepare myself for? I might need to do some research. I might need to really look up some support for why I've made the choice I've made, or what I need to do to stand behind where I want to go with this. So that could be an example of resistance to the disruption of change there. When we're talking about this idea of redirection, it's sort of that for me is the skill of reading a room real time, navigating real time and saying, okay, I'm sensing that something just happened here. Now, what do I need to do? I need to really look at what just got brought up in this situation, even though the agenda is pulling me in this direction, because I recognize if I don't redirect my energy and the resources of this team or this collaborative effort here, we might get too far away from where we're actually trying to go. An example of reconstruction would be something I think a lot of leaders and organizations are dealing with at this point is, how do we repair? How do we repair when things are difficult, when disappointment comes in, when people make mistakes, when there are wrongs that need to be shifted, or a direction, things go too far, and we really need to say, oh gosh, let's take a couple steps back. We need to really look at what just happened and then put some different things in place so that we can ensure this doesn't happen again, that we're not putting other people at risk, that we're not making too rash of decisions before we really understand where we're trying to take this longer term. And another thing I love about the study and about the analogy of this connection to real world situations is that sometimes we end up stronger. And I think it's important to recognize that change isn't always going to mean bad, hard, scary. It does sometimes, and I absolutely will never take that away from the process of what change is and how difficult it can be when we're in that real time. But I think that's where this compass idea comes back in, is what really helps us stay true to where we're going, and how do we stay aligned with the right direction? And again, that doesn't mean which decisions we make. It's really about the direction. So for me, there are a couple of guideposts that can be really helpful in, let's say, orienting this compass, making sure we're staying on track, and keeping in mind what it means to navigate change in a holistic way. And so those three guideposts for me are curiosity over assumption, number one. I think a lot of us get into some trap spaces when we realize we've made assumptive decisions versus really approaching something with curiosity. Number two, seeking questions over answers, which again can be a little bit countercultural because leaders are, quote, supposed to have all the answers. But I think more than that, leaders should be knowing how to ask the right questions and looking at asking themselves the right questions to get them further along the path. And then three, which is perhaps the most difficult one, but again, this is what I really believe in wholeheartedly, is embracing the not knowing. It's so difficult because we crave the comfortable, the familiar, and the known. But that unknown is really the space that allows for possibility. And that, I think, is what's fascinating about the whole experience of change. So curiosity over assumption, questions over answers, and embracing the not knowing as these guideposts for what it means to sort of keep your compass in alignment with navigating some of these complexities.
Yeah. That is, I mean, I'm just like nodding over and over. Yes, 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 yes. So, we've heard those things before, and yet, it's still challenging to do. Like, it sounds easy, but it's really hard. That's why we're talking about the hard skills, people. So hard. What gets in the way of leaning into those guideposts? And how can leaders, this is a more important question in my mind, given the challenges of leaning into those guideposts, how can leaders know that they're going in the right direction if you're also embracing not knowing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I'll start there, and then I'll go to some of the barriers. You know, the unknown, even when I just say that, the unknown, what do we think of immediately? We go huge, big. Like, I get the image of like a black hole of space in front of me. The unknown is this huge, big thing out there, right? And that feels scary, hard, you know, all of these qualifiers and adjectives we can place on the unknown. That is so big and huge. But what if we just reclassify that and to just say the unknown is just something I don't yet know? It is just a new fact, a new state, a new choice, a new this. And so number one, that starts to create a little bit of difference in terms of this big unknown. And the unknown is just something I haven't yet experienced. And we have all had an enormous amount of experience with things we haven't yet experienced. It's what our whole lives have been about. It's just we forget that. And every time we come up to this threshold, we think, oh gosh, I've never done this before. But we have done this before. We do this time and time and time again. So one piece of the unknown is establishing what I call proof loops. This idea that we've done this before. Let's wire in the fact that I have done something I didn't know how to do, and it didn't end up going in a sour direction. I actually did learn something. It brought us further toward where we wanted to go in this specific situation. But it's very easy to say, yeah, I did that before. We really have to take the opportunity to say, okay, what does it feel like to have done it? What does it mean to have done it? And let's actually celebrate that we've done it, because we don't do a lot of that celebration piece of it, which is the last part of the wiring. It's very easy for our system to forget. We have a lot of negative bias built in. Dr. Hansen's research on negative bias is really fascinating. He refers to it as our systems are like Velcro for bad experiences and Teflon for good ones. You know, those good ones just kind of slide right off, but the bad ones really stick with us. So we have to work very hard to counteract these negative biases. And the more we can actually wire in the positives, the good things. And I'm not talking about the huge wins when you broke through some major visionary change. I'm talking about where an employee, you actually felt that sense of that employee was seen, heard, valued, and you were a part of that. That is an important moment to say, okay, look, we can do this. We can do this at the one-on-one level, and then we can go ahead and do it on the broader level. The other thing about the unknown that I feel is really interesting comes from the work of Ferris Storr, who wrote a wonderful book called The Discomfort Zone. And really what is so fascinating is she talks about what she titles BMDs, brief moments of discomfort, before you move over into the unknowns. And more often than not, the most difficult part about change is not the big unknown out there. That's actually fun. That's exciting. What's out there is on the other side. The difficult part are those brief moments of discomfort when we choose to step away from something we know into something that is less familiar. And that is an important distinction to make too, is it's important, I think, to say, is it really that whatever is next is so big and hard and scary that that's what it is? Or is this brief moment where we need to go, ooh, this is not going to feel wonderful, but it's an important step to get to the other side. That distinction, I feel like, is really, really important for us. And, you know, in terms of the barriers, I'll just briefly mention, because there's more to get into here if we want to go in that direction, but our habits and patterns are one of the biggest barriers and challenge we have. And it's a blessing and a curse, so to speak, because the whole reason we are so efficient is because we have habits and patterns. But if we're not aware of them, ignoring the barriers leaves us open to all sorts of different layers of vulnerability. Or that's when we can become blindsided, because the things we don't address will eventually become limitations. So a lot of those barriers, and I'm not saying they're self-imposed, I'm saying they're just a piece of our habits, our patterns that we do need to shed some light on in order to ensure that we are setting ourselves up for moving forward in the most, I guess, easy, I hate that word, but easy way as we can, considering how difficult the process can be.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about your life. I think about my life. Listeners, think about, your lives. What just keeps coming up and over as kind of our challenges, they're usually about the same thing. And you choose whether you lean into it or not, right? You choose. And if every time you choose not to lean into it, it's going to come up again, because that's your habit and pattern and you're not paying attention to it, right? But it's usually because we're avoiding some small experience of discomfort. We know it's going to be uncomfortable. We know it's going to be rocky or bumpy. So when we come back after this ad break, let's pull it all together to sort of think through what might you do as your next step. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Lisa DeAngelis, and we'll be right back in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Lisa DeAngelis, who's a holistic change practitioner. We've been talking about leaning into the unknown, overcoming the barrier or desire to just not go there because of discomfort. And I will tell you that if you truly are honest with yourself and think about every time you learned something, it wasn't because you were comfortable. It wasn't because you avoided it. It was because you navigated something that was really scary or uncomfortable, and you came out with a lesson learned that you applied, right, in your life. I think about that all the time. And I think about, if you took even mental health intervention, what is the treatment for anxiety? The most common evidence-based treatment for anxiety is exposure therapy. What does that mean? It means not avoiding. Avoidance keeps the anxiety going. It is finding a way to slowly dip your toe in further, and move into the area of discomfort or fear and practice staying there until it's no longer the same level of fear, right? So that is the same concept when you're applying it to navigating the unknown. So Lisa, I know you have lots of really cool frameworks. I'm curious, what are some quick takeaways that our listeners can think about when they are navigating an unknown? How do they think about this? What is a way, a practical way for them to start thinking about this?
Yes, that's great. And you set this up perfectly, because there are sort of three resource skills, I'll call them. Shall we call them soft skills or hard skills? But anyway, through this framework that I use, these three things can be used as sort of levers, right, that we can exercise in conjunction with each other to really help support this process. So they are stretch, permission, and perspective. So this concept of stretch is exactly what you were talking about here. We have a comfort zone and we have a discomfort zone, or a panic zone, as I'll sometimes call it. And when we're in our comfort zone, it's safe, it's easy, it's familiar, right? That panic zone is when we are flipped all the way over into freak out mode, right? It's too much, we're anxious, we're fearful, all of these kinds of things. Some people will say you're either in your comfort zone or you're in your panic zone. I think there's a stretch zone. And that's sort of this interesting sweet spot. The stretch zone is where we change. We can't change when we're panicked, and we can't change when we're really comfortable. So exercising this stretch, and the word is stretch for a reason, right? It is malleable. It is something we can actually strengthen. And one of the ways to do that is to look at our edges. What does it take to move from our comfort zone into this stretch zone, feeling a little bit uncomfortable? We're feeling stretched there, but not so far that we're panicked. And that might start like a really narrow space. And we might say, oh, shoot, already in panic because I moved too quickly through there. So our work is to figure out how to stay in that stretch zone and actually expand it, because that's where we're going to experience a lot of these changes. And so as we combine this concept of stretch, our stretch zone, we need to utilize two other things, and those are permission and perspective. Permission is an interesting one because sometimes we are waiting for permission from an external source. Internally, do we really think this is okay to do or try? And so permission is a really interesting one. But again, it's not like all of a sudden we have permission and we've jumped from 0 to 100, permission functions a little bit like a ladder. It's sort of like we climb up a little bit, maybe we have a step or two down, and then we climb up further. And as we give ourselves more permission, we can stretch more. And then we can take a little more permission and maybe stretch more or less, or we might need to take a few rungs down. And those things kind of work in conjunction with each other. The last piece of this is perspective. And I referenced earlier this idea of a 10,000-foot view, a balcony view. But more than that, my concept of perspective really is this idea of zooming in and zooming out. And what does it feel like if we zoom in and then we say, ooh, I'm really zoomed in. What happens if I zoom out? And what do I see now? And this is a skill, this ability to zoom in, look at the micro, zoom out, look at the macro. Where do I need to give permission or take permission? Where do I need to stretch more? Where do I need to pull back the reins a little bit? And you can see these three sort of concepts start to work in conjunction with each other to create this experience of change that isn't so much like do or die, now or never, A to B, but really becomes this like, okay, now I'm moving here, now I need to adjust here. And this constant concept of being aware, choosing our direction, reorienting and reassessing, and then repeating, because it doesn't happen one time through A to B. It really takes a lot of that shift. And that's something I think we need to normalize, because a lot of people feel like if they have one chance and if they don't make the right decision, that's it. But what happens if we really reframe this idea of you're going to make a wrong decision as what is the best decision I can make in this situation that allows me to learn what I need to do then to move to the next space? It's sort of this next right thing. And that then becomes a little bit less like right and wrong, or you're in the right or wrong direction, as much as saying, oh, I'm a little off. I need to reorient in this direction. I need to reorient in this direction. And it becomes a much more actually fluid way to navigate the process of complex change than sitting there and saying, that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I'm thinking about this, the sort of relatable experience that I had was also, again, related to physical therapy, and personal training. So, out of physical therapy, there was this goal to strengthen my back muscles. Okay. And so, they said, you should be able to do a pull-up, which I think is kind of crazy at my age, but I was like, okay, whatever, And so I've been working with a personal trainer to strengthen my back muscles. And what we're doing is literally evaluating how much can I do without overexerting myself and then pulling something. And if I overexert and I'm feeling it, to back up a little, knowing that is past my stretch zone, as you call it, right? And continue tinier steps, right, for me. And everybody has sort of like their own step ladder. And it's different for each person. Some people can make massive gains, doing the same thing that I'm doing. And for me, it takes tinier steps, and that's okay, as long as I'm moving forward and I feel there's progression, but I'm tracking very closely. But I also have a coach who's doing this thing for me, who's offering me scaffolding and, helping to support me. So all of that to say, you don't have to do this alone. If all of this sounds nebulous to you, this is what coaches do. This is what consultants do. And so if you want to learn more specifically about what Lisa does and how she can help you, where can they find out more about you and how to apply this?
So my website is the best place to start, just www.lisadeangelis.com. There's a wealth of information and resource there. You can also find information about my book, which I encourage you to check out. There's obviously so much more than I could than I could begin to cover here. But I just love what you were saying, because this really is a big piece of pulling it all together. And what you just mentioned, I think, is important to reiterate, is that sometimes this is where we go back to this, like, what are my habits? What are my patterns? What are the barriers here? And to just kind of pull in one more, directional analogy, is to say it's a little bit like, upgrading your software system on your GPS, to sort of say, oh, I'm at a completely different situation now. We need to upgrade these maps, and I can do a lot more intricate turns now that I actually know what's happening. And so I think that's an important aspect to bring in, to fold this all together, is to just say, all of this requires us to just really continue to pull in, pull out, really consistently look. And that is actually the fun. That's the exciting part of navigating change, is that it is not like we are on a one-way path once we make this one decision. We've always got the ability to make different choices. And that, I think, is the excitement of what change does, and how change can lead us to bigger possibilities than we could ever have imagined.
Absolutely. All right. So you've gotten many gold nuggets from Lisa today. Listeners, what did you take away? And importantly, what is one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Lisa? Share it with us on LinkedIn. We are there, and we'd love to hear from you and cheer you on. And also share it at talkradio.nyc. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all over the place. We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please subscribe, go to the podcast, leave a review, share with others. The stuff we talk about is also part of our research-based strategic leadership pathway model that we teach in the TowerScope Leadership Academy, a private coaching and learning community for socially conscious leaders in healthcare, academia, tech, and STEM industries. To learn more, go to gotowerscope.com and click on Leadership Academy. Thank you to talkradio.nyc. I'm Dr. Mira Branco of the Hard Skills Show, and thank you to Lisa DeAngelis for being a wonderful guest. Have a great rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from. Bye, everybody.